Story 1: The Whispering Shadows. Prologue. Emily Wallace inherits a secluded mansion from her estranged grandmother, nestled deep in the woods, miles away from civilization. Excited yet apprehensive, she moves in, seeking a fresh start and a connection to her past, unaware of the dark secrets the mansion holds. Part 1: Arrival. Chapter 1: The Inheritance. Emily Wallace sat at her kitchen table, the official letter from her grandmother's lawyer in her hands. She never expected to inherit anything, let alone a mansion in the middle of nowhere. She barely knew her grandmother, having only visited her a few times as a child. Her parents had always spoken about the old mansion with a mix of nostalgia and caution, but they never went into details about why they had left it behind. Emily felt a mix of emotions: curiosity about the place, excitement at owning such a unique property, and a touch of fear of the unknown. She decided to embrace this opportunity, seeing it as a chance to reconnect with her family's past and maybe start a new chapter in her life. Chapter 2: First Night. The drive to the mansion was long and winding, taking Emily deep into the woods. As she approached, the towering structure came into view, standing proudly amidst the encroaching foliage. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, with its tall, arched windows and ivy-covered walls. Emily spent the day exploring the mansion, noting the antique furniture, the grand staircase, and the many rooms filled with dust-covered relics. She found an old family portrait in the living room, depicting her grandmother as a young woman, her grandfather, and a small child she assumed was her mother. As night fell, the house took on a different aura. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the silence was occasionally broken by faint, indiscernible whispers. Emily tried to brush it off, attributing it to her imagination and the old house's creaks and groans. Chapter 3: Unsettling Noises. That night, Emily awoke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. She sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped, leaving only the ticking of an old grandfather clock to break the silence. She convinced herself it was just the house settling and went back to sleep, though the unease lingered. The next day, Emily continued her exploration, discovering hidden rooms and dusty heirlooms. In a small drawer of a writing desk, she found an old key. It didn't fit any of the locks she had tried so far, but she decided to keep it with her, intrigued by the mystery it presented. Part 2: The Discovery. Chapter 4: The Attic. Emily's curiosity led her to try the key on every locked door in the mansion. Finally, at the end of a long corridor, she found a small door that had unlocked. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading up to the attic. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, trunks, and cobwebs. As she rummaged through the items, she found a stack of old diaries hidden in a chest. Blowing off the dust, Emily opened the first diary. It belonged to her great-grandmother and detailed the family's daily life and the construction of the mansion. However, as she read further, the tone of the entries changed. They began to mention a series of strange occurrences and a pervasive feeling of being watched. Chapter 5: The Curse. The more Emily read, the more she learned about a curse placed on her family. According to the diaries, the land on which the mansion was built had been taken from a local tribe. Their shaman had cursed the Wallace family, condemning them to be haunted by restless spirits. The entries grew more desperate, detailing how the family members were tormented by their worst fears and memories. Emily was skeptical, but the more she read, the more she felt an uneasy connection to the past. The whispers and footsteps she had heard began to make sense, and she realized the mansion was far from a safe haven. Chapter 6: Escalation. That night, the disturbances escalated. Emily saw shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her vision. They whispered her name, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Objects began to move on their own, and she woke up with scratches and bruises that she couldn't explain. Determined to get to the bottom of the haunting, Emily reached out to a paranormal investigator she found online. Desperate for answers, she hoped he could help her understand the nature of the curse and how to break it. Part 3: Desperate Measures. Chapter 7: Seeking Help. David, the paranormal investigator, arrived a few days later. He was a serious man with a deep knowledge of the supernatural. He conducted a thorough investigation, using various tools to measure paranormal activity. The readings were off the charts, confirming Emily's fears. David also brought along a local historian, Linda, who provided more context about the shaman's curse. They discovered that the spirit haunting the mansion was the shaman himself, seeking retribution for the land stolen from his people. Chapter 8. The Cleansing Ritual. David suggested performing a cleansing ritual to appease the spirit. Emily and Linda gathered the necessary materials, including herbs, candles, and an ancient chant found in the diaries. On the night of the ritual, the atmosphere in the mansion grew even more oppressive. As they performed the ritual, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Suddenly, the spirit manifested a horrifying figure with hollow eyes and a skeletal face. The ritual backfired, and the spirit became enraged, attacking them with a fury they hadn't anticipated. Part 4 Climax. Chapter 9. The Final Attack. Emily and David barely escaped the attack, retreating to the basement where they found temporary safety. Realizing that the ritual had only made things worse, they regrouped and formulated a new plan. David recalled a passage from the diaries about the original shaman's burial site, which was rumored to be on the mansion's grounds. They decided to find the grave and attempt to communicate directly with the shaman spirit. Chapter 10. The Burial Site. Using the diaries as a guide, Emily, David, and Linda ventured into the woods surrounding the mansion. After hours of searching, they found a small, unmarked grave. Emily, trembling with fear, knelt by the grave and made a desperate plea to the shaman, offering her own life in exchange for peace. As she spoke, the ground began to shake, and the spirit appeared once more. This time, however, it seemed less hostile. The shaman's hollow eyes bore into Emily's, and she felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow and pain. She closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Part 5 Resolution. Chapter 11. A Temporary Peace. When Emily opened her eyes, the spirit was gone. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued the mansion lifted. She returned to the house with David and Linda, exhausted but relieved. Despite the spirit's apparent appeasement, Emily remained deeply traumatized by the experience. She decided to leave the mansion, unable to shake the feeling that she was still being watched. She packed her belongings and prepared to return to the city. Chapter 12. Ominous Ending. As Emily stood on the porch, ready to leave the mansion forever, she heard a familiar whisper in her ear. "You can never leave," it said softly. She froze, terror washing over her. The house, it seemed, had claimed her as its own. Emily drove away, but the haunting stayed with her. She knew that no matter where she went, the mansion and the curse would always be a part of her. The story of the whispering shadows was far from over, and Emily would forever be looking over her shoulder, waiting for the whispers to return. Epilogue. Years later, the mansion stood empty once more, a testament to the Wallace family's tragic history. New owners came and went, each lured by its beauty and charm, only to be driven away by the malevolent presence that lingered within. The curse of the shaman continued, and the whispers never truly ceased. Story 2. The Silent Watcher. Prologue. Jake, a teenager, is left alone for the weekend while his parents are on a business trip. Excited for his freedom, he plans a weekend of gaming and relaxation, unaware that someone is watching him. Part 1. The Stalker. Chapter 1. Freedom. Jake's parents packed their bags, ready for their weekend business trip. They hugged Jake goodbye, reminding him to be responsible while they were away. Jake, a typical teenager, was thrilled at the prospect of having the house to himself. He planned to spend his time gaming, eating junk food, and enjoying the solitude. As soon as his parents left, Jake settled into his gaming chair, ready to dive into his favorite online multiplayer game. He relished the freedom, unaware that his actions were being closely monitored. Chapter 2. Unusual Activity. During his gaming session, Jake noticed a new player repeatedly joining his games. The player, with the username Silent Watcher, sent him cryptic messages that unsettled him. "Nice game, Jake. Hope you're having fun alone." At first, Jake thought it was a prank by one of his friends, but the messages became more personal and specific, indicating the sender knew details about his house and his current activities. The unease started to grow. Chapter 3: Discovery of Cameras. Later that night, Jake's Wi-Fi began to act up, causing his game to lag. Frustrated, he went to check the router. While inspecting it, he noticed something strange: a small, unfamiliar device connected to the network. It looked like a tiny black box with a blinking red light. Jake's heart raced as he realized it was a hidden camera. Panic set in as he scoured the house, discovering more hidden cameras in various rooms. Each camera was placed strategically, covering almost every corner of the house. How long had they been there? Who had put them there? And more importantly, why? Part 2: The Dark Web. Chapter 4: Dark Web Revelation. Terrified, Jake called his best friend, Kyle, who was known for his tech skills. Kyle arrived quickly, and together they examined the cameras and the black box. Kyle identified the device as a high-tech transmitter, likely sending the video feed to a remote location. Curious and horrified, Kyle delved into the dark web to find any clues. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon a disturbing site featuring live feeds from hidden cameras all over the world. To their horror, they recognized Jake's living room on one of the feeds. The site was filled with viewers who paid to watch people's private lives. Chapter 5: Increasing Threats. The realization that he was being watched by strangers horrified Jake. The cryptic messages from Silent Watcher now made sense. They were coming from someone who was watching him through the cameras. Jake felt violated and scared, unsure of how to protect himself. He called the police, who conducted a search but found no immediate evidence of a break-in or who might have placed the cameras. They promised to investigate further but seemed skeptical of the seriousness of the situation. Jake felt frustrated and helpless. Chapter 6: Paranoia sets in. Jake disconnected all devices and covered the cameras, but the fear lingered. He began to see shadowy figures outside his windows, hear strange noises at night, and find physical notes left inside the house with messages like, "I'm closer than you think, and you can't hide from me." His paranoia grew, affecting his sleep and his school performance. He felt like he was constantly being watched and followed, even when he was outside his home. The once safe and familiar environment had turned into a nightmarish prison. Part 3: Home Invasion. Chapter 7: Desperation. Desperate for help, Jake turned to his friends, but they couldn't stay with him indefinitely. They tried to secure the house, adding locks and alarms, but nothing seemed to keep the stalker at bay. The intrusions continued, and Jake felt increasingly isolated and scared. One night, while his friends were over, the power went out. In the pitch darkness, they heard the sound of breaking glass. The stalker had broken into the house. The friends scattered, trying to find places to hide or escape. Chapter 8: Cat and Mouse. A terrifying game of cat and mouse ensued inside the house. Jake used his knowledge of the layout to evade the stalker, but the stalker seemed to anticipate his every move. It was as if he had studied the house thoroughly, which made sense considering the cameras. Jake and his friends managed to send a distress signal through a neighbor's phone, calling the police. They barricaded themselves in a room, waiting in fear as the stalker tried to break through. Part 4: Climax. Chapter 9: Trapped. As the police arrived, the stalker finally broke into the room where Jake and his friends were hiding. In a desperate struggle, Jake managed to trap the stalker in the basement, locking him inside. The police stormed in, but the stalker had already found a hidden escape route and fled, leaving behind only a chilling message on the wall: "This isn't over." Chapter 10: Escape. Jake and his friends were shaken but relieved to be alive. The police increased their patrols around the house, but the stalker was never caught. The cameras were removed and security systems were upgraded, but Jake knew deep down that the threat wasn't gone. Part 5: Aftermath. Chapter 11: Lingering Fear. Despite the increased security, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He constantly looked over his shoulder and struggled with severe anxiety. The stalker's message haunted him, making it impossible to feel safe. Jake's family decided to move to a different city, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. The new house was equipped with state-of-the-art security, but Jake's paranoia followed him. Every shadow, every noise, every stranger made his heart race. Chapter 12, Final Threat. Just when Jake began to feel a semblance of normalcy, a package arrived at their new home. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words "Found you" scrawled across it. Jake's worst fear had come true. The stalker was still watching. Epilogue. Jake lives with the constant fear of being watched. His paranoia affects his daily life, making it hard to trust anyone or feel secure. The stalker remains a shadowy figure in his life, an ever-present threat. Jake knows that no matter where he goes, the silent watcher is always one step behind, ready to strike again. Story 3: The House That Remembers. Prologue. Sarah and Mark, a young couple, move into a quaint countryside house known for its charming history. They plan to restore it, unaware of the malevolent forces tied to its past. Part 1: A Fresh Start. Chapter 1: New Beginnings. Sarah and Mark stood in front of their new home, a charming countryside house surrounded by rolling hills and lush forests. They were thrilled about starting their new life together and had big plans for restoring the house to its former glory. The first few weeks were spent cleaning, painting, and making minor repairs. They found the work rewarding and enjoyed uncovering the house's unique features, like the original woodwork and beautiful stained glass windows. Everything seemed perfect, but their bliss was short-lived. Chapter 2: Strange Echoes. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the attic, Sarah heard faint voices and laughter. She assumed it was the sound of the wind or her imagination, but the eerie echoes persisted. The next day, she found a stack of old photographs and letters hidden in a dusty corner. The photographs depicted previous owners and their families, while the letters were filled with stories of joy and tragedy. Sarah felt a deep connection to the house's history and was eager to learn more. However, the strange echoes continued, making her uneasy. Chapter 3: Unearthed Secrets. As Sarah delved deeper into the letters, she discovered a pattern of misfortune that had befallen the house's inhabitants. There were accounts of sudden illnesses, accidents, and even mysterious disappearances. The more she read, the more she realized that the house had a dark past. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the house over a century ago. She wrote about a malevolent entity known as the Keeper that haunted the house, forcing residents to relive their worst memories and driving them to madness. Part 2: The Haunting. Chapter 4: The Keeper. Sarah shared her findings with Mark, who was skeptical but supportive. They decided to investigate further, hoping to uncover the truth about the Keeper. As they researched, they found more accounts of the entity's presence, all describing similar experiences of terror and despair. Their peaceful nights were disrupted by unsettling dreams and waking nightmares. They heard whispers and saw shadowy figures, and their belongings began to move on their own. It became clear that the Keeper was not just a legend but a real and dangerous presence. Chapter 5: Visions of the Past. Both Sarah and Mark started experiencing vivid, horrific visions of past deaths and tragedies that had occurred in the house. The visions were so real that they left physical marks on their bodies, scratches, bruises, and burns that had no logical explanation. The entity seemed to be manipulating their memories, causing them to doubt their sanity and each other. Sarah saw Mark as a dangerous stranger in her visions, and Mark saw Sarah as someone possessed by evil. Their once strong relationship began to deteriorate under the strain. Chapter 6: Seeking Answers. Desperate for answers, they consulted a medium who had a reputation for dealing with dark energies. The medium, a woman named Agnes, arrived with a solemn warning. She sensed a powerful and malevolent force within the house and cautioned them against trying to confront it directly. Agnes conducted a séance, hoping to communicate with any spirits trapped in the house. The séance was intense, with objects flying across the room and temperatures dropping drastically. Agnes made contact with Eliza's spirit, who confirmed that the Keeper was real and that it fed on fear and suffering. Part 3: The Entity. Chapter 7: Personal Hauntings. The hauntings became more personal and violent. The entity targeted Sarah and Mark's deepest fears and insecurities, manifesting them in terrifying ways. Sarah's fear of drowning led to her being almost suffocated by phantom water, while Mark's fear of heights caused him to hallucinate deadly falls. The poltergeist activity escalated, with doors slamming shut, furniture being thrown, and eerie music playing from unseen sources. Sarah and Mark were physically and mentally exhausted, feeling trapped in their own home. Chapter 8: Failed Exorcism. In a last-ditch effort, they attempted an exorcism, guided by a priest and Agnes. The ritual was elaborate, involving prayers, holy water, and protective symbols. However, the keeper proved too powerful, and the exorcism only seemed to anger it further. The entity manifested in a more tangible form, a dark, shadowy figure with burning eyes. It lashed out violently, injuring the priest and nearly killing Agnes. The failed exorcism left Sarah and Mark more desperate and terrified than ever. They realized that they were dealing with a force beyond their understanding or control. Part 4: Confrontation. Chapter 9: Possession. One night, Mark began to act strangely. His eyes glazed over, and his voice took on an eerie, otherworldly tone. He became aggressive, and Sarah quickly realized that the keeper had possessed him. She narrowly escaped his attacks, locking herself in a room and praying for his safety. Trapped and isolated, Sarah frantically searched through Eliza's letters, hoping to find a clue about how to defeat the keeper. She came across a letter describing a hidden room within the house, a place where the original owners had tried to contain the entity using a cursed artifact. Chapter 10: Hidden Room. Determined, Sarah scoured the house until she found the hidden room behind a false wall in the basement. Inside, she discovered an altar with a grotesque idol made of bone and sinew, the artifact Eliza had mentioned. The room was filled with a palpable sense of dread. The moment she touched the idol, she was assaulted by visions of the past, seeing through the eyes of those who had suffered at the keeper's hands. She saw Eliza's final moments, the terror etched on her face, and felt the overwhelming presence of the entity. Part 5: Breaking the Curse. Chapter 11: Destroying the Artifact. Realizing that the artifact was the key to the keeper's power, Sarah knew she had to destroy it. She grabbed a heavy hammer and, with all her strength, smashed the idol into pieces. As the artifact shattered, a deafening wail echoed through the house, and the temperature dropped sharply. The keeper's shadowy form appeared, writhing in agony. The house began to shake, and walls cracked, as if the very foundation was being torn apart. Sarah braced herself, determined to see it through. The entity's form dissipated, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but the house was still crumbling around her. Chapter 12: Aftermath. Sarah and Mark barely escaped the house as it collapsed in on itself. They stood outside, watching as the once charming countryside home was reduced to rubble. Mark, now free from the possession, was weak and disoriented, but alive. They left the ruins behind, determined to start anew. Sarah documented their ordeal, writing a book to warn others about the dangers they had faced and the malevolent entity that had haunted them. Despite the destruction of the house and the artifact, she couldn't shake the feeling that the keeper's presence hadn't been entirely vanquished. Epilogue. Epilogue. The charred remains of the house stood as a grim reminder of the horrors it had held. Rumors persisted of the entity's lingering presence, and local legends grew around the ruins, deterring anyone from rebuilding on the cursed land. Sarah and Mark moved far away, but the trauma of their experience stayed with them. Sarah's book became a bestseller, spreading their story and serving as a cautionary tale. Yet, in the quiet moments, Sarah sometimes felt a chill in the air, a whisper of something dark and malevolent, reminding her that some curses never fully die. Each of these stories delves into the psychological and physical horrors of being alone and haunted by unseen forces, highlighting the thin line between reality and the supernatural. From inherited curses and voyeuristic stalkers to malevolent entities tied to cursed artifacts, the characters face relentless terror that forces them to confront their deepest fears and fight for their survival.